Welcome back for another complete set presentation. This time we're going to go back to 1984, a set that's now 41 years old. We're going to show you the 1984 Topps baseball set. As usual, I'll talk a little bit about the set itself, go over some things that happened during the course of the season. But this one's also a little bit special too, because this is the second of two sets that I bought from an athletic trainer that worked for the Minnesota Twins. Bought these probably back in about 2002. And several of these cards are actually autographed by Minnesota Twin players and some of their opponents. And I'm going to show you some of the highlights first, but let's look at the card design and I'll show you some of the highlights of the autographs and we'll go into the set itself. So here we go. Here is the basic card design for the 1984 Topps set. As usual, this was a 792 card set. It was released in series of wax packs, cello packs, rack packs, vending, and also complete sets at this time. This was also the first year where they introduced Topps Tiffany. So the print run for that was about 10,000 sets. Those obviously are cards that are a little bit more coveted from this era as opposed to the ones that were pulled from packs. So the basic card design, as you can see down here in the corner, because these are going to be highlight cards I'll go over in a minute, is going to have a vertical team name here, which is a little bit of a unique design, at least during this period. I believe this is the first time they actually put a vertical team name on the set. Then you'll have a series of two images. Typically there's like one more like an action type of shot, although this one's a portrait here of Gary Lucas, followed by like a close-up, a cropped image of their face. You can see them more closely. So this was a very popular set at the time because it was featuring the really coveted rookie card. And for me, remembering back in the collecting at the early 80s and mid 80s, this was the guy you wanted to get. You wanted to get Tom Mattingly because he was one of the biggest stars of the game at that point, and he was playing for the biggest team, the New York Yankees, and he was phenomenal during the 80s. And you can see here he's pictured right at the beginning of the set. So let's jump into the set now. So let me grab a little drink of water first and jump right on in. So you see it starts with highlight cards, as many of the sets did during the 1980s. This one you had highlights of two Hall of Famers. You had Rickey Henderson here, and you had Steve Carlton featured there, along with Dan Quisenberry. And then you have highlight cards from the year that have multiple players on it. So you talk a little bit about Ryan, Carlton, and Perry surpassing Walter Johnson's career strikeout total. And then you also have no-hitters that were pitched by David Righetti, Bob Forsch, and Mike Warren, as well as the highlights of these three future Hall of Famers retiring in the same season, which were Gaylord Perry, Johnny Bench, and Carl Yastrzemski. Unlike the 84 Donruss and Fleer sets, you don't see a single player card images of these guys. This is the only card that you will see for this set. I've seen this card autographed by all three sometimes. It's pretty expensive, but that would be a really cool thing to at some point add into the collection. It would be hard to make it at this point because Perry is now gone. All right, so let me show you some of the autographs that I was able to pull out of this set, starting with Steve Carlton. You can tell this was probably during his playing days, obviously, it was. Probably was in the late 80s when he was still pitching, probably when he finished his career with Minnesota. So this is when it was probably gotten, that late 87 season. This one was from Topps Archives that I got recently. In the last couple of years, it's Bobby Cox. Sorry for the glare on that. We have a few more Steve Carltons. Another autograph there. One more Steve Carlton. This is his, obviously the base card design with the autograph on it. And then also another fun one, they must have at some point played the Royals, and he approached George Brett and got his autograph. Those are fun little items. I didn't know they had these in them when I purchased them at the time. It was only after the fact that I found out that he had autographs in there, which they sold for relatively inexpensive because he didn't autograph that feature of the set where several of these cards are going to be autographed. All right, so let's jump into it. So we got Don Mattingly here, Robin Yount. We also have a series of team leader cards. This one's actually autographed by the pitcher here. So you have the player, two players from the team, one hitting leader and one pitching leader. As normal, I'll try to point out some of the Hall of Famers, stars, and some players of note as we go through here. We got Greg Linsky when he was playing with the White Sox. White Sox were the previous AL West champions, but they didn't win it this season in particular. We'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. So we have our first another autograph here. We have Frank Viola, who was a two-time Cy Young Award winner. We got Wade Boggs. Don Sutton down here with Milwaukee. Dusty Baker, probably future Hall of Fame manager. A pretty good player, too, during his time. So Julio Franco and Darryl Strawberry had their first pack pulled cards at this point. They were in the 83 Topps Traded set. So those were also two other cards that people were chasing for at this point. Julio Franco obviously didn't become the player that Darryl Strawberry did, or that obviously Don Mattingly became. None of them were Hall of Famers, but each of them are cards that people kind of chased after at this point too. Here's Jim Fry, which we'll start now. We'll just kind of talk a little bit about the season. He was your manager of the year for the Cubs. So in 1984, the Cubs won the, I believe it was the West Division at that time. They were able to win, and it was their first playoff appearance since 1945, which was pretty interesting too. They ended up losing in the playoffs. Actually, they won the East Division. They lost to the Padres, who made their very first World Series appearance in 1984. But they lost 4-1 to the Detroit Tigers, which is the Tigers' last World Series championship. And the other playoff team that was in the mix was the Kansas City Royals. During this season, the Tigers actually began the season 9-0 and went on to go on to a 35-5 start and never trailed in their division. So here's some of the highlights from the season itself. We'll talk some about the league leaders and MVPs and such as we go through here. We got Paul Molitor. Actually, this one's kind of interesting. It's Max Venable. This is the father of the new White Sox manager. Got Kirk Gibson up here, Mike Scioscia, maybe a future Hall of Fame manager, possibly. Got Nolan Ryan featured on this card. Billy Martin down here. Brett Butler was a good player during his time, great leadoff hitter. Pedro Guerrero, very good player during this time. Lamar Hoyt, Cy Young Award winner the previous season. Reggie Jackson, love that. I love any Reggie Jackson card where he's finishing his swing like this, where his trailing knee is almost in the dirt. I just think his swing looks so amazing when you see pictures like that. And they featured a lot through the 70s and 80s. Good old Ron Guidry up here. Keith Hernandez, definitely a star of this era, former MVP. Dale Murphy, MVP as well. Someone I think should be in the Hall of Fame personally. We got Charlie Huff up here in the corner. Ozzie Smith. Before we go into the league leaders from 83, just wanted to talk to you a little bit about what the league leaders were for 84. So your batting leaders were Mattingly and Tony Gwynn. Also, your home run leaders were a tie in the National League, Mike Schmidt and Dale Murphy. Two pretty good names there, but you also had Tony Armas having a career season with Boston. Led the AL in home runs as well as RBIs. And then in the National League, RBI was also tied again by Schmidt and Carter. Gary Carter in particular. All right, so your batting leaders from the previous season feature Matlock and also Wade Boggs. Home run leaders were Rice and Schmidt. The National League, Murphy was on there. Stolen base leaders, we had Raines and Henderson. As I mentioned here, Lamar Hoyt was on there. Strikeout leaders were Jack Morris and Steve Carlton. And any other Hall of Famers, doesn't look like it at that point. I just love the uniforms from this era too. Just kind of the piping on the sides of most of these uniforms, either on the sleeve itself or along the side of the uniform and the pants. Just reminds me of also playing baseball when I was a kid, because all these armored uniforms kind of mirrored Major League Baseball uniforms. So I thought it was so cool when I had a uniform that looked like a major leaguer. I think a lot of us can relate to that. Here we got Dale Murphy up here. Here we got a Gary Gaetti autograph. Definitely a good player during this era. Frank White, probably a better player during this era. I know I've said it before, but I would like to see him be considered for the Hall of Fame, along with Lou Whitaker, Ricky Henderson. Frank Robinson, manager of the Giants. Lee Smith. Here's that Darryl Strawberry card I was talking about earlier. Jack Morris. All right, so Willie Hernandez, he's pretty interesting because here he's featured with the Phillies, but He was with Detroit at the beginning of the season. He actually was an MVP / Cy Young Award winner. He had a wonderful season for the Detroit Tigers during that year. Your Cy Young Award winner for the National League was Rick Sutcliffe, who came over to the Cubs from the Indians at one point during the season and went on to win over 20 games combined. And the MVP was Ryan Sandberg from the Chicago Cubs at that point. And your rookies of the year were Alvin Davis from the Seattle Mariners and Dwight Gooden from obviously the New York Mets. And I mentioned the manager of the year being Jim Fry, but the other league, which I didn't mention yet, was Sparky Anderson. We got Andre Dawson up here. Almost missed him. I want to miss the Hawk. Joe Morgan with the Phillies. Carlton Fisk. These are just such a clean design. I love the sets from the early parts of the 80s for the tops in particular. Got Venezuela. Just think they nailed some of these designs once they had competition again. Their game really elevated, I thought. They had some really nice looking sets. We got Ricky Henderson. Eddie Murray. Here's Sutcliffe, as I mentioned, who later came over to the Cubs. League leaders for the Mets, we have Tom Seaver and Mookie Wilson. Tony Gwynn, down here at the bottom. Sparky Anderson, I mentioned earlier. Old Tom Candiotti, knuckleballer. He was around a long time. Rod Carew, batting leader of the Angels. Rick Monday was still an active player at this point. Here we got Jorge Bell, otherwise known as George Bell, later on in his career. He was traded for Sammy Sosa by the Cubs, and the White Sox received him and made his final season was actually when they made the playoffs in '93. So it didn't actually pan out so well because he wasn't all that good with the White Sox and was out of baseball the following season. But he was a star at the points in the 80s. Good old Chuck Tanner up here in the top. Dave Dravecki. What a good story there if you ever want to look up a really story about perseverance. Pete Rose, another autograph here of John Butcher. Well-known John Butcher. Royce Smalley, who was a Twin later in his career. Son of a Major League player too, by the way. Would have been so cool if he had a lot more autographs from the visiting teams at this point, but didn't turn out that way. It's mostly Twin players, but not all of them too either. Darrell Evans nearing the end of his career. Bucky Dent as well. Some interesting names. Don Baylor, decent player. Future manager, Hal McRae. His son also played in Major League Baseball. I got a Kent Herbeck autograph. Very cool. He has a statue outside of the Twin Stadium, Target Field. He was a really good player for them in the 80s and early 90s. George Foster with the Mets. Dave Stewart with the Rangers. That's interesting. Obviously, before he became the Dave Stewart with the A's. He kind of struggled a little bit before he really kind of got in a groove when he came over to Oakland. We got Ron Say. Came over to the Cubs. So was Bob Denier later, was an acquisition by the Cubs for their playoff team in '84. Tim Loudner, Twins catcher. Tim Raines. Ralph Hook autograph. That's pretty cool. I forgot I had that one. I don't know how he got that one because I don't know when he would have crossed paths with him, but there it is, Ralph Hook, who obviously managed the Yankees at points during the parts of the late 60s. So he was a manager for, and a teammate actually of Mickey Mantle and some of those other guys from that era. All right, we're getting near the All-Stars here, but let's look at Tony Perez first. So before I jump into the All-Stars, I don't want to miss Steve Garvey as well, a former MVP when he was with the Dodgers. Wanted to talk a little bit about, this was also during the season, we had a lot of Hall of Fame players. So now that we talk about Ralph Hook, I think it's kind of good to talk about the guys that actually made it into the Hall of Fame or voted in, who made it through the Veterans Committee. You had a pretty good list this particular year in '84. You had from the White Sox, Luis Aparicio, the Dodgers, Don Drysdale. From the Boston Red Sox, mostly a few other teams, Rick Farrell, From the Minnesota Twins, Harmon Killebrew. And from the Brooklyn Dodgers / LA Dodgers, you had Pee Wee Reese. We're all voted into the Hall of Fame during this season. All right, so here's your All-Stars. Let's point out the Hall of Famers. Look no further in this first row, we have Schmidt, Smith, and Raines. Second row, Murphy, who should be in, I think, the Hall of Fame. You have Andre Dawson, Gary Carter. Down at the bottom, you have Steve Carlton. Up on this row, we got Eddie Murray, Lou Whitaker. Again, I'd like to see him reconsidered for the Hall of Fame. George Brett, Cal Ripken, Jim Rice, Dave Winfield, Ted Simmons, recent Hall of Fame inductee the last couple of years. Ron Guidry was a very good pitcher and former Cy Young Award winner, I think League MVP too. And then Quisenberry kind of rounds it out there. Got Lou Piniella, who might be a Hall of Fame manager at some point. Has a World Series title to his name when he oversaw the 1990 Reds. All right. Tommy John with the Angels. He was with everybody at the later part of his career. Cecil Cooper was a very good hitter during this era. Got Cal Ripken on a league leader card. A Randy Bush autograph. It's kind of fun. Rusty Staub. Still an active player at this point. Hall of Fame player Harold Baines. Everybody's favorite Harold Baines, including mine. He's actually a really wonderful person, by the way. I know a lot of people give him a hard time for his Hall of Fame induction, but he's just a wonderful human being. Tom Bernansky down here, an autograph, which I thought was interesting. Gary Carter. He was a good power hitter during his era. He's one of those like 3 outcomes guys that probably would be really popular now. That were a little out of vogue at that time. We didn't have a lot of these guys in the league that were like walk, strikeout, home run, but Bernansky was one of them. Fergie Jenkins is the ERA leader for the Cubs on this one. Dave Winfield up here. Dave Engel, another autograph here. Mookie Wilson, good player. Nolan Ryan. Dick Hauser, who actually died while he was actually the manager of the Royals after he'd won the World Series with them in '85, passed away during the '86 season. Fergie Jenkins, as we mentioned earlier. Cal Ripken. Raleigh Fingers. Good old Terry Francona. Someone might at some point make it as a Hall of Fame manager. He should. I mean, he won 2 World Series for crying out loud with the Red Sox and helped break their drought. And just has been an excellent manager wherever he's gone after he went through his first couple of years struggling when he was with like Philadelphia and such. Has been a really excellent manager ever since that time. George Brett. Joe Torre, Hall of Fame manager. Brad Havens autograph. Alan Trammell. Ron Davis autograph. Good old Bob Boone there. Father of current Yankees manager, Aaron Boone. Got a George Frazier autograph. George Hendricks, pretty good player during this time too. Yeah, and a lot of these names take me back. Bill Buckner was with the Cubs briefly, before obviously went over to the Red Sox. Jim Rice. Hall of Fame manager, Whitey Herzog. I got a Carlton Fisk with the paper loss here. I don't know how that happened. I didn't notice that before. It's kind of weird seeing cards with paper loss from this era, but there you go. I got one. Leon Durham, who was a pretty good player with the Cubs during that time. Actually, Leon Durham is kind of noted for his time with the Cubs here because he had a ball that, unfortunately, he misplayed at first base during one of the playoff games where they could have potentially advanced to the World Series. Maybe not quite as profound of a blunder, I guess you will, as the Buckner play, but it's definitely a local one that's gotten a lot of attention. And obviously, he and Steve Bartman's sort of incident in 2003 have somewhat been forgiven by the fans after their World Series win in 2016. Pete Filson. Bruce Bochy, essentially Hall of Fame manager here. Great power hitter here, Dave Kingman. He was one of those 3 outcome guys too. Would probably be a superstar in this current era of baseball. A pretty big star at that point too. Got Joe Niekro, brother of Phil. He and his brother have the most wins by any pair of brothers in Major League Baseball history. Tony La Russa, I doubt that will be broken because it's well over 500 wins, probably close to 600 wins. Might even be over 600. You got Ryan Sandberg, your MVP. Rod Carew. Chetland was a decent player. Steve Sachs was a very good player during this era. Later played with the Yankees and also White Sox. Little Frank Howard was managing at this point. Al Oliver, someone I think should also be reconsidered for the Hall of Fame. A couple highlights of note. I know we showed Ryan Sandberg a few cards away, but he won the MVP that season, and partially because of his outstanding display during a game that happened on June 23rd where the Cubs beat the Cardinals 12-11, and he hit 2 game-tying home runs off of Bruce Sutter during, I believe, the 9th and 10th inning, and they went on to win that ball game. It was on national television when it happened, and it was a very historic game here locally. I think not in St. Louis so much, because they were trying to chase the Cubs for the playoff position at that point, but the Cubs went on to kind of go on a tear thereafter. And I remember locally, I was still pretty young, but like Cubs fever was all over the place, except for in my household, because we were Cardinal fans and I was becoming an emerging White Sox fan at this point. There was a no-hitter this season. It actually was by a Hall of Famer, and it was Jack Morris. He actually threw the no-hitter against my White Sox on April 7th. And then towards the end of the season, on September 30th, Mike Witt of the Angels threw a perfect game, actually, against the Texas Rangers. All right, let's pick it up and finish up the set here. Got a Ron Washington autograph here. That's pretty cool because he's still active manager in baseball. He's over the Angels. Actually was the manager for the Rangers back-to-back World Series teams that lost both series. You got Ted Simmons here. El Presidente, Denny Martinez, Dave Rigetti. Here's another autograph here of Rick Lysander, what I'm not as familiar with, I'll be honest. As Parrish, a very good catcher during this era. Tony Pena, also a very good catcher this year, more of a defensive player, whereas Parrish was a little bit of both, defensive and offense. I get near the end here, we got Phil Niekro. Buddy Bell here. Lou Whitaker and Jack Morris on the Tigers leader card. You got Mike Walters autograph down here. We got Rich Goose Gossage up here. Tommy Lasorda. Fred Lynn. One of just, I think, 2 players to win MVP during their rookie season. The other one being Ichiro. He was the first to do it. Lou Whitaker, Mike Schmidt, and then they also did a series of active leaders, so active career leaders, which I thought was interesting. So the NL career batting leaders at this point, active ones, led by Pete Rose. We also have Dave Parker, who's going to be in the Hall of Fame, featured on there. Hit leaders, at this point, it was Pete Rose. He had Rusty Staub featured on there, and he also had Tony Perez, who's in the Hall of Fame. Home run leader, Schmidt was the leader, but she also features Kingman, who I talked about earlier, and Tony Perez. RBI leaders was Perez, and then you see Al Oliver featured on here as well. Stolen base leaders in the NL, Joe Morgan was the active leader at that point. Career victory leaders, you had Steve Carlton at that point, along with Seaver and Fergie Jenkins. That's a great combo card right there. And then the NL strikeout leaders, you had Nolan Ryan's, Carlton and Seaver, another great combo card. ERA leaders, not too bad either. You had Steve Carlton and Seaver on here. We had save leaders, you got Bruce Sutter, Tug McGraw, not a bad card there. And then you go to the American League, and here you feature with the career batting leaders, you got Carew and Brett. Hit leaders, you had Carew, Reggie Jackson, Bert Campaneris. Home run leaders, we have here we have Reggie Jackson. AL career RBI leaders, you have Reggie Jackson leading there, along with Ted Simmons. Stolen base leader, Not sure where we have Ricky Henderson. Not sure how he kind of got missed here, but maybe he didn't have enough steals yet at this point to be on this list. So like some good names of this era, but no Hall of Famers listed here. And then our career AL pitching leaders at this point for the active ones, we had Jim Palmer and Don Sutton, featured with Tommy John. Subsequent one with the strikeouts, we had Don Sutton. Kuzman was a very good pitcher during his time, and Hall of Famer Burt Bryleven. ERA leaders, you had Fingers, Palmer. Guidry was a very good pitcher during this era. Then our active save leaders was led by Raleigh Fingers, but we also had Ritz Goose Gossage featured on that card as well. We got Dwight Evans getting near the end here. Ted Simmons featured there. There's Tug McGraw, as I mentioned earlier. Bruce Sutter, Hall of Fame reliever. Tom Seaver, his last card with the Mets. That was his second stint with the Mets. Hall of Fame manager Dick Williams. Dennis Eckersley. Mickey Hatcher, who actually was part of the World Series team with the Los Angeles Dodgers in '88. Here we have Jim Palmer. That's his last card, actually. Hargrove, who was part of the Indians teams of the 90s as their manager. Here we have another autograph. It's of manager Billy Gardner. Ken Griffey Sr. We got the Cobra, Dave Parker up here in the corner. Steve Carlton. And on our last page, we have the batting leaders for the Red Sox. We have Boggs, obviously listed there at that point. Burt Bryleven. And our last card in the set was Bill Russell, not a Hall of Famer, but a very good player from that era. All right, so that is it. I hope you guys enjoyed this one and have a great rest of your week. And I'll be back soon with another video.